It's 1982. The first CD player goes on sale in Japan. Time magazine names its Man of the Year the computer, and Pontiac launches this, the third generation Firebird. US sports cars of this era are generally considered to be pretty poor. But is that fair? Today we will find out, and no review would be complete without a little mention of the car that made this one so famous. So I'm going to give you a few little prize nuggets about the Knight Rider car as well. It was launched alongside the Camaro and the chassis is pretty much identical. The only differences are in bodywork, trim and marketing. The Pontiac was supposed to be the more stylish, refined car. The Chevy, the more all-out, simple hot rod. The new Firebird was smaller and lighter than the previous cars. And by lighter, I don't mean a trivial amount. 230 kilos less than the second generation. Not only that, but it was more aerodynamic. When it first came out, 0.32 as a CD, but by 1985, where they'd added some more little spoilers and things like that, that got down to 0.29, and the aerodynamics was a big selling point for these. As usual with American cars, there was a bit of a bewildering array of engine options that seemed to change year by year, but when first launched, believe it or not, the bottom of the range engine was a 4-cylinder with just 90 horsepower. That didn't stick around for too long. They also had a V6 engined one, which initially had 105 horsepower, later 130, but then we had the real stuff, the meaty V8s with 145 horsepower, then 160, and then in 1988, which was when this car was made, that was already making 180 horsepower. In 1988, there was also a 5.7 litre option. That engine produced 225 horsepower. It was standard in the GTA, but you could get it as an option in one of these. This was originally a 5-litre car, but has now been upgraded to 5.7. Let's see how it drives. In 1982, when this first came out, the average American house price was $67,000 and the launch price was $10,900. Interestingly, in the UK, in 1982, £23,000 was the average house price. Now, we can't really talk about this or do a review without mentioning the show that made this famous. Of course, for the previous Gen 2 cars, it was Smokey and the Bandit, but for the Gen 3, it was Knight Rider. It ran from 1982 to 1986. This was known as the Knight Industries 2000, or KITT. It was a hugely advanced self-talking car with a computer, which was voiced by William Daniels, who also played Benjamin's father in The Graduate. He was like a proper method actor. KITT also, interestingly for the time, ran on hydrogen and had a 0 to 60 time of just 2 seconds. Let's see how this one feels going up the road. Well, it is a 5.7 litre V8. I think estimated power is between sort of 230 and 260. It's got a different chip and some very light mods. So he's not, Tom, who brought it up, isn't exactly sure, but you know, it feels rapid. I think supposedly with this option, it was supposed to be 0 to 60 in about 8 seconds. You can really feel that torque. Talking about KITT again, another couple of interesting tidbits there is that originally for the TV show, there were 22, maybe 23 cars that were used. When the show finished in '86, all but 5 of them were scrapped, so 18 were crushed. The reason for that is that in 1982, there was a train carrying Pontiacs which derailed in California. And Universal Studios had a deal with General Motors that they were able to buy 18 of those cars cheap, but in exchange for that, they had to make them, you know, they had to get rid of them and crush them at the end of the program. So only 5, I think they still, all 5 still exist, but only those have survived from the original show. Also, the truck that was used that you could see KITT go in and out of, that ended up being a carrier for race cars and was later found in a field, and I think has now been restored or is in the process of being restored. But enough Knight Rider trivia, and let's get back to this and how it feels. As well as being lighter, smaller, faster and more aerodynamic, there was another upgrade that these had, and that was that it's still got a solid rear axle, but it went from the very agricultural leaf spring setup of the previous car to a coil spring for this, which would have improved things drastically. Also, the Trans Am version of the Firebird had a slightly quicker steering rack and different suspension. This one, as you can see, rides quite high, as it would have originally. And although it can deal with the smaller bumps pretty well, it really is very crashy over anything but the small frequency stuff. The steering is really nice and sort of crisp and responsive. It's quite light and it tucks into the front quite nicely, but then as you're pushing through the corner, it kind of wants to push wide. It's quite a strange feeling setup in some ways. Perhaps it's just a question of getting used to it. Also, Tom told me that he thinks the steering box on this needs rebuilding. You can feel that because on the straight ahead, there is quite a lot of movement. And okay, it's not a rack and pinion setup, so steering boxes are never quite as good, but you can see, especially under braking like I was doing there, the car wanders. But as I say, you can't really judge normal Firebirds for that, because this one, although it is a very, very nice restoration, still has that one last thing that needs to be done. And let's just get a bit more sound from that engine again, foot to the floor. It's crazy, it changes up at before 4,000 RPM, which is something that I do find quite odd. I know that these engines aren't very high revving and that there is a lot of torque there. So, I mean, you're still going pretty quick, but odd feeling that. It's still pulling quite strong at 4, so you'd think it would keep pulling after that. Not sure if there is a sports setting. There's 2 drive options here. One has the overdrive and the other one doesn't, is what I was told. I don't know. But certainly this does feel like an old car in the way it drives, and I think that European sports cars of the time would have felt more refined than this. Then again, this, you know, was so cheap in comparison. You can see though where some of the cost saving has taken effect. The interior, I have a lot of affection for, but you know, there is a lot of cost cutting here as well. Now, one of the things is that they've gone for a sort of a futuristic approach. There's this little square hatch pattern, which is echoed in various parts of the car, the tail lights as well, the center console, in the instruments, which I think is supposed to maybe have a bit of a computer feel to it. And that I really like. The materials and that used though, they just do look, you know, they look pretty cheap. There's a lot of grey plastic, and I don't even mean dark grey plastics. It just, you know, it doesn't feel like an upper market car. The little replacement for a glove box, I don't know, maybe cheap. I quite like it. It's leather. You've got a sort of a sideways pocket, a top pocket there. That's okay. But yeah, the dash feels like it's fairly cheap material-wise. On this bumpier road as well, you can feel all the trim in the cabin moving around. I'm sorry to say, it does feel a little bit low rent, but we know that about the American stuff from this era, that they gave you a lot for your money. Big engines, flash-looking cars that were cheap. But yeah, the materials weren't maybe the best. In terms of ergonomics though, it's all pretty much to hand, and it is really pretty much a comfortable car. This one is a tribute to the Recaro edition. So I can't remember which year it was, but they made one with Recaro seats that had a few little differences. Tom managed to get some seats. They're not the original Recaros, but they are almost identical. On the original one, it would have had some net headrests as well. Incredibly though, this is trimmed in the finest Scottish leather, which feels amazingly soft and supple, and would have been loads better than what the original cars came with. I mean, there's some other idiosyncratic stuff about this. At the back, there's a little sunshade, and that pulls in and out on a roller, obviously as you open and close that rear deck. The comfort handling balance also feels a bit odd. Now, this is running on bigger 17-inch wheels, so I'm sure that has some effect on it, but I don't think that they are responsible for the issues that it has over bigger bumps. As a Trans Am, it would have had thicker anti-roll bars front and back. The chassis itself just doesn't feel like it's well enough developed to work well as a whole if you're really trying to push it. General Motors, I think, did make a genuine effort with this car. It was a huge step forward. Still though, it is behind the European and the Japanese competition in terms of outright handling. I think you have to look at it as an overall package and what it offers. What it gives you is an older style big engine, a V8 with effortless torque, that lovely sound, and it gives you a striking car. But it does that at the cost of outright ability. It kind of depends on what you're looking for, really. Thank you so much to Tom for bringing it down. It's been really entertaining driving one of the American icons. Thank you all for watching. See you for the next video.